Kellan Kerrigan was already late picking up his 6-year-old son, Zane, from after-school care when he caught sight of a woman limping down the sidewalk like she'd just stepped off a bad movie set. She was holding her ankle, muttering under her breath, and obviously trying not to cry right there on the curb. Her soft blue sweater was dirt-smudged at the elbow, and her sleek black leggings had a rip across the knee. She didn't look like she belonged in this part of town, too polished, too clean-cut, too expensive. Kellan's first instinct was to keep going. He didn't have time for detours. Not when he had to get dinner started, help Zane with math homework, and figure out how to stretch $38 until Friday. But then she tried to stand, wobbled, and let out a sharp cry. That did it. "Hey," he called, jogging over. "You okay?" She looked up, startled. Her hair was pulled into a high ponytail, her eyes wide and a little wild. "I think I twisted it. I was trying to avoid a dog, and all right, don't move," he said, crouching beside her. "Let me see." Her ankle was already swelling. He gently pressed along the bone, and she flinched. "It's probably a bad sprain. Can you move your toes?" She nodded. "Barely. You're lucky it's not broken." He glanced around. "Did you drive here?" "No, I was walking back to my hotel. It's like 5 blocks that way." "You're not walking anywhere on that ankle," he said without hesitation. "Come on, my truck's right there. I'll drive you." She hesitated. "I don't want to be a bother." Kellan raised an eyebrow. "You're sitting on a sidewalk holding your leg. You're already a bother." "Might as well commit." She laughed, actually laughed, and Kellan realized she had one of those rare, bright laughs that hit you straight in the chest. "All right," she said, "I'll take the ride." He helped her up, one hand on her waist, the other steadying her elbow. She leaned into him just enough to make him hyper-aware of how close she was, how good she smelled, like vanilla, and something subtle he couldn't place. Once she was settled in the passenger seat of his dented Ford pickup, she finally looked over at him, her voice softer. "Thank you." "I'm Bianca." "Kellan," he replied, turning the key. "And you're lucky I'm not a serial killer," she smiled. "You don't have the vibe," he chuckled. "Good to know." He dropped her off at a sleek, modern hotel that looked completely out of place in their quiet, working-class neighborhood. "You're staying here?" he asked as he parked in front. "Yes." "Are you here for work?" Bianca paused. "Kind of. I'm taking a break from things, needed a reset." He nodded, not pushing. She was probably some burnt-out executive or influencer trying to find herself. Either way, not his business. She unbuckled, then turned to look at him. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why'd you stop?" "Most people would have just walked past." Kellan shrugged. "I've been through enough crap in my life to know what it's like when no one helps." Bianca looked at him for a long second. "Well, thank you." "You didn't have to." "Yeah, but I wanted to." She bit her lip, hesitating again. "Would you want to have coffee sometime as a thank you?" Kellan blinked. "That was unexpected." "You don't owe me anything." "I know, that's why I want to." He was quiet for a beat, then nodded. "All right." "Sure." Bianca smiled like it was the first real smile she'd had in a while. "Tomorrow, same time." "Okay." She got out, limping slightly, and waved before disappearing into the hotel. The next day, Kellan dropped Zane off at school and headed downtown, where Bianca had suggested a small cafe nearby. She was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 coffees, her ankle wrapped and propped on a chair. "You made it," she said, lighting up. "I said I would." They talked for almost an hour, about nothing and everything. Bianca was cagey about what she did for a living, but she asked a lot about Kellan, how long he'd been a single dad, 5 years. What Zane was like: smart, stubborn, obsessed with cartoons, and how hard it was juggling 2 jobs. She didn't pity him. That was rare. "You don't talk about yourself much," he finally said, sipping his coffee. "That's because I'm more interesting in small doses. You don't seem like someone who does anything small." That made her laugh again. "All right, fine, I run a company." "A company?" "Yeah, multiple actually." "Fashion, tech, real estate." Kellan blinked. "Wait, you're serious?" Bianca shrugged. "I don't usually lead with that. People treat me weird when they know." He stared at her. "You're a millionaire," she nodded slowly. "Technically, yes." Kellan leaned back in his chair. "And you let me drive you around in my rusty truck like I was doing you a favor." "You were doing me a favor." He shook his head in disbelief. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I liked how you treated me." Kellan was quiet. This was a lot. He didn't even have health insurance, and she probably had a personal chef. She leaned forward. Does it change how you see me? He met her eyes. No, but it changes how I see myself with you. Her face fell slightly. Kellan sighed. I'm not used to this. Women like you. Bianca reached across the table and touched his hand. Kellan, I don't care about the truck, or the jobs, or the money. I care that you stopped to help a stranger, that you're raising your son alone, that you're real. He looked down at her hand on his. You don't want real. You want an escape. No, she said firmly. I want something that matters. They kept meeting for coffee, then for walks, slow walks, given her healing ankle. Then dinner. Bianca invited him and Zane to a casual dinner at her rented townhouse one Friday. Kellan almost said no, but Zane's eyes lit up at the mention of pizza and that cool lady, so he agreed. The evening was easy. Zane was his usual wild self, but Bianca handled it like a pro, listening, laughing, even helping him build a lopsided Lego tower. After Zane fell asleep on the couch, Kellan found himself alone with her in the kitchen, washing dishes while she dried. This feels normal, she said quietly. It does. Bianca glanced over at him. I like your world. Kellan gave a short laugh. My world's a mess. It's honest. She paused. I feel more myself with you than I have in years. He set the sponge down and turned to her. I want to believe this is real. It is, she said, stepping closer. Kellan, I'm not trying to fix you. I don't want to be saved. I just want to be with you. Then she kissed him soft, sure, and slow. And Kellan kissed her back like he'd been waiting for that moment every day since his life had fallen apart. He had no idea how this would work. But in that moment, with her in his arms and Zane snoring on the couch 2 feet away, it felt like maybe, just maybe, he finally had a shot at something real again. Bianca hadn't planned on returning to the townhouse after that night. It had started as a temporary rental, something discreet, while she figured out what to do next, somewhere to escape boardrooms and backstabbing investors, her face off the covers of business magazines for a change. But after kissing Kellan in that quiet kitchen, with the faint hum of the dishwasher and the warmth of his hand lingering on her waist, her plans unraveled faster than she could rebuild them. The next morning, she called her assistant and extended the lease for another month. Meanwhile, Kellan kept telling himself it wasn't serious. Couldn't be. She'd get bored, realize she missed her high-rise meetings and private jets, and he'd go back to worrying about overdue bills and Zane's school lunches. But then, she texted saying she'd found a place that sold the exact toy Zane had been talking about, some limited edition dragon thing, and would it be all right if she dropped it off? Kellan told her she didn't need to, but Bianca showed up anyway, her ankle healing fast and her confidence returning just as quickly. Zane opened the door before Kellan could stop him. Bianca, he shouted, throwing his arms around her waist. Kellan stood behind him, arms crossed. You really didn't have to, I wanted to, she said, holding up the toy. Besides, I needed an excuse to see you both. Zane snatched the dragon and ran back inside, leaving Kellan and Bianca on the porch. You're not good at doing nothing, are you? He asked. She tilted her head. Is that a challenge? He looked at her, the way her eyes lit up when she teased him, and realized with a twinge of panic that he liked it too much. More like an observation. She leaned against the doorway. Then observe this. I have the next 3 days completely free, no calls, no meetings. And I want to spend them with you. He hesitated, glancing toward the living room where Zane was already dismantling the toy's packaging. It's not exactly romantic here. I'm not looking for romantic, she said. I'm looking for real. He stepped aside to let her in. The weekend passed in a blur of card games, backyard soccer, with Bianca seated on a folding chair, and laughing every time Zane insisted she be the referee, and late-night conversations on the porch while the boys slept. They never talked about what would happen after. Kellan didn't ask when she was leaving. Bianca didn't offer. On Sunday night, after Zane had gone to bed early from sheer exhaustion, Kellan sat across from her at the kitchen table, watching her stir sugar into her tea. You ever think about walking away from it? He asked. She looked up. From what? All of it, the money, the power, that world. I have, she said quietly, more than once. So why don't you? She hesitated. Because I built it from nothing, and walking away, it would feel like giving up a piece of myself. He nodded slowly. I get that. But I also never realized how much of myself I lost building it. He leaned back, studying her. You don't talk like someone who's used to being vulnerable. I'm not. But you make it feel safe. Her voice trembled slightly at the end, and he found himself reaching across the table without thinking, brushing his thumb against her knuckles. I don't know what this is, he said. But I haven't felt this in a long time. She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. Me neither. The next morning brought reality slamming back into place. Kellan was late again. Zane had spilled juice on his homework, and the washing machine had started making a grinding sound that meant either something was broken or dying. Bianca offered to drive them, and though Kellan hated taking help, he reluctantly agreed. As they pulled up in front of the school, Bianca turned to Zane. You got everything? She asked. Zane nodded, clutching his backpack. Thank you for the dragon. You're welcome. He hopped out and waved before running toward the building. Kellan stayed quiet as she drove toward his place. You're mad I drove him, she said finally. I'm not mad, you're uncomfortable, he exhaled. I'm not used to anyone stepping in. I'm not trying to replace anyone. He turned to her. I know, but when you're gone, he'll notice. She slowed to a stop at the curb. So that's what this is. You're already bracing for it to end. He didn't answer. I'm not going anywhere, Kellan. You say that now. She stared at him, voice low. I don't make promises I can't keep. He looked out the window, jaw tight. Neither do I. When she reached for his hand, he didn't pull away. But he didn't hold on either. That night, Bianca waited, hoping he'd call. He didn't. On Tuesday, she went to the boutique downtown and bought a dress she didn't need, then returned it an hour later. She wandered the park for a while, sat on a bench where she'd seen a father and daughter feeding ducks, and thought about the kitchen table in Kellan's house, the one with a permanent scratch down the middle, and a missing leg cap that made it wobble every time someone leaned on it. She missed that stupid table. Wednesday morning, she showed up at the door with a paper bag of fresh muffins and no expectations. Kellan answered in a paint-stained shirt and bare feet, clearly in the middle of fixing something. I got muffins, she said, holding up the bag. He stepped aside wordlessly and let her in. Zane was still asleep, and the living room was a mess of tools and scattered screws. Kellan nodded toward the coffee table. I was trying to fix the leg. She set the bag down and crouched beside him. Need help? He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Why are you really here? I wanted to see you. He leaned back, wiping his hands on a rag. You could have anyone. I don't want anyone, I want you. He shook his head. That's not enough, it is for me. He stood, pacing once. You don't get it, Bianca. I can't give you what you're used to. I can't take you to Paris on a whim. I can't buy you diamonds or fly you around in a damn helicopter. She rose slowly. I didn't fall for the man who could do any of those things. I fell for the man who makes his son pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, who fixes table legs at midnight, who doesn't flinch when life punches him in the gut. He stilled, eyes on hers. I fell for the man who showed up when I didn't even know I needed someone, she said, voice breaking. I'm not asking for Paris, I'm asking for you. Kellan looked at her like she was something he couldn't believe was real. Then the floor creaked behind them. Zane stood in the hallway, rubbing his eyes. Are you staying for breakfast? He asked Bianca. She blinked, then smiled. If that's okay with you. Kellan glanced between them, then nodded. Yeah, it's okay. As Bianca followed Zane into the kitchen, Kellan stood in the living room, heart pounding. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, he wanted to find out. Kellan stood at the edge of the rooftop garden, watching the city lights flicker below like constellations brought to earth. The evening air, crisp with the first hints of fall, carried the faint scent of jasmine from the planters Bianca had filled herself. He didn't know what surprised him more, that she'd bought a place in the city, instead of returning to her high-rise penthouse uptown, or that she'd asked him and Zane to come see it before anyone else. She called it a small place, he muttered, adjusting the hem of his sleeve as he glanced at the glass doors behind him. This thing's bigger than the school gym. Inside, Zane was exploring the open-concept living room with wide eyes, marveling at the sleek spiral staircase and the massive aquarium built into the wall. Bianca had walked him through the kitchen, showing him how the fridge opened with a touch and how the oven had no knobs, just a seamless panel that lit up when she passed her hand in front of it. "Your apartment has a robot," Zane had said in awe. Bianca had just laughed and said, "Only the helpful kind." Now she stepped out onto the rooftop with 2 mugs in hand, offering one to Kellan. "Chamomile," she said. "I figured you looked like you could use sleep more than caffeine." He took it without a word, the steam curling between them. "This place is something else." "I wanted something different," she said, sinking onto a cushioned bench beside the railing. "It's not permanent, just a change of pace. You redecorated the entire place in 3 weeks." "I like putting things together," she said. "It's easier than fixing what's already broken." He leaned against the railing, the mug warming his hands. "Is that why you haven't gone back to work?" Bianca looked out over the skyline, her voice low. "They're still fighting over pieces of the board." "My name's on every contract, but I'm not needed in the day-to-day anymore. I built something too big to control." Kellan nodded slowly. "And you're okay with that?" "I thought I wouldn't be," she admitted. "But now, I like waking up when I want. I like reading books without checking emails between chapters, and I like you." He turned to her, surprised by the simplicity of it. "You don't even know me." "I know you built a life out of scraps," she said. "I know you never ask for anything you can't repay. And I know watching you with your son makes me want things I didn't think I deserved." Her words landed heavier than he expected, and he found himself sitting beside her without thinking, their shoulders nearly touching. "I don't know what to do with any of this," he said. "I'm used to fixing things with my hands. It doesn't come with instructions." Bianca's eyes searched his. "Then let's build it like we would anything else, one piece at a time." He looked down at her hand resting on the bench close enough to reach. "I'm not good at asking for help." "I'm not offering help," she said. "I'm offering a place beside me." They sat in silence, the city shimmering around them. Eventually, Bianca stood and turned back toward the door. "You hungry?" "I had someone drop off some things from that bakery you said Zane liked." Kellan raised an eyebrow. "How'd you remember that?" "I remember everything you don't say." That night, after Zane fell asleep in the guest room now decked out with comics and action figures that hadn't been there that morning, Kellan wandered the apartment, taking in the details he hadn't noticed before. The books on the shelves weren't for show. They were worn, dog-eared, annotated. There were framed photos of places he didn't recognize, but also one of him and Zane from the county fair, clearly taken without his knowledge. "Isn't it weird?" he asked, finding Bianca in the kitchen. "This. You and me in the same world." She didn't look up from slicing apples. "I think it's overdue." He leaned against the counter, watching her. "You've got everything people dream of, I've got duct tape holding my window shut. You also have a son who still thinks you hung the moon." She offered him a slice. "That's worth more than anything I've got." He bit into the apple, not because he wanted to, but because she offered it. "You ever think about what happens if this doesn't work?" "All the time," she said. "But I think about what happens if it does more." He let the silence stretch between them, not because he didn't have an answer, but because the answer scared him. The next day, Bianca showed up at Kellan's house unannounced, a folded piece of paper in her hand. Zane was at a friend's sleepover, and Kellan was elbow-deep in a pipe replacement project under the sink. "Got a minute?" she asked, stepping over the scattered tools. He wiped his hands on a rag, wary. "Depends." She handed him the paper. "I want to offer you something, but I need you to read it before you say no." He unfolded it and scanned the lines, his brow furrowed. "This is a job contract," she nodded. "Project manager. My company's launching a new housing initiative, affordable properties, sustainable materials. You'd be working with a small team. Hands-on, good pay, full benefits." He stared at her. "You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a future that doesn't require duct tape." He looked down at the paper again. "You're serious?" "I didn't put your name on it as a favor," she said. "I put it there because you're good. And because I know you'd never take anything you didn't earn." He folded the paper slowly. "I need to think about it." "Take your time," she said. "But know this, whether or not you take the job, I'm not going anywhere." Later that night, Kellan laid the contract on the table and stared at it. He imagined the things it could mean. A steady income, health insurance, weekends where he wasn't pulling doubles just to cover groceries. He also imagined the risks stepping into her world more than he already had, depending on someone else. He didn't sleep much. The next morning, he showed up at Bianca's place with the paper in hand. "I'll take the job," he said. Before she could even finish her greeting, her eyes lit up. "You sure?" "I'm sure I want a life that doesn't feel like surviving." She stepped aside to let him in. "And I want it with you." She reached for his hand, fingers threading through his. "Then let's build it," he squeezed gently. "Together." In that moment, the distance between their worlds collapsed. Not because everything was suddenly easy, but because they'd chosen to meet in the middle, hand in hand, with nothing but faith and a future they were finally ready to claim. The first day, Kellan walked into the Kerrigan Initiative office, wearing a button-down shirt Bianca had insisted he keep after a charity dinner. He felt like he was stepping into someone else's story. The kind of story where polished floors always gleamed, people didn't flinch when they talked about quarterly projections, and coffee came in glass mugs that cost more than his old toolbox. The project space was in a converted warehouse near the river, clean-lined wood, exposed brick, and ceilings so high his voice echoed when he spoke too loudly. His new team greeted him with polite nods and genuine curiosity, but no one treated him like a novelty. Bianca had made sure of that. On his desk was a folder labeled Phase 1, Hartley Street. Inside were blueprints, supplier contacts, and a handwritten note in Bianca's tidy script: "Let's build something that lasts." By the end of the week, he had memorized every inch of the site, learned how to navigate the digital project board, and figured out which of the architects liked their coffee bitter and which preferred chai. He also discovered that he liked the rhythm of this new life: early mornings with Zane before school, structured hours at work, and evenings where his hands weren't raw from wrenching old pipes, but still felt like they'd done something that mattered. Bianca didn't hover. She didn't micromanage or parade him around like a trophy. She let him lead, even when she was in the room. That, more than anything, grounded him. One afternoon, while they walked the edge of the Hartley Street plot, hard hats on and steel-toed boots crunching over gravel, she paused beside a stack of reclaimed cedar beams. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "I've been thinking," he replied, brushing sawdust off his gloves. "About the kind of home I want for Zane, and what it means to build something that doesn't just survive, but holds." Bianca glanced at him, her eyes soft. "That's why I brought you into this. Not because you can manage suppliers or read blueprints, but because you understand what a home should feel like." He adjusted the measuring tape on his hip. "I want to build one for us," she stilled. "You mean?" He turned toward her fully. "I mean I want a life with you. Not just dinners and weekends. A home. A family." Bianca's mouth parted slightly, like she was caught between breath and something else. "That's what I want too." He reached for her gloved hand, the sun catching the dust in the air around them like gold. "Then let's stop talking about it and start building it." That night, sitting on the steps of Bianca's townhouse while Zane showed her the comic he'd illustrated himself, Kellan pulled a small, worn ring box from his jacket pocket. The box looked out of place in the modern space: faded velvet, the hinge a little loose, but the ring inside gleamed with quiet promise. Bianca blinked as he opened it beside her. "Kellan." "It's not flashy," he said. "It's not new. It was my mother's. She wore it every day until the end." Bianca's throat worked silently. "I know we come from different worlds," he said, voice steady, "but I don't care about any of that. I care about the way you make my son feel seen. The way you look at me like I'm more than the wreckage of my past. I want to wake up beside you, argue over which cereal to buy, and grow old watching Zane become the man I hope he'll be." Zane, who had been pretending not to listen, looked up from his comic. "Are you asking her to marry you?" Kellan didn't look away from Bianca. "I am." Bianca took the ring from the box slowly, holding it like something sacred. "I've had more proposals than I can count," she said. "Some from men who wanted my name, some from men who thought they loved the idea of me. But this is the first time it's felt like home." She slid the ring onto her finger where it fit perfectly. Zane whooped and ran inside to tell the fish in the aquarium. Bianca leaned in, pressing her forehead to Kellan's. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." The wedding was small by her standards and huge by his. They held it in the greenhouse that had been built next to the Hartley Street model home, a glass oasis filled with wildflowers and warm light. Bianca wore a tailored ivory suit that made her look like she belonged in every room she walked into, and Kellan wore the same shirt she'd once picked out for him, now crisply pressed beneath a charcoal vest. Zane stood between them, holding the rings, his tie crooked and his smile wider than the sky. When the officiant asked if Kellan took Bianca to be his wife, he didn't hesitate. "I already do," he said. Bianca's vows were simple. "You helped me find myself when I didn't realize I was lost. You gave me a place to rest, and every day with you feels like the future I thought I'd never deserve." They kissed to applause and laughter, and Zane demanded 2 slices of cake before they'd even gotten to the first dance. Afterward, as the guests trickled out and the lights dimmed, Kellan pulled Bianca into the center of the greenhouse floor. "I don't know how to waltz," he admitted. "Then we'll invent our own," she said, resting her head against his chest. They swayed there, music drifting through the open doors, the scent of lavender and eucalyptus wrapping around them like a promise. Later that night, back at the townhouse, their townhouse now, Kellan carried Bianca across the threshold with a grin. "I didn't think you'd actually do the whole carry the bride thing," she teased. "I figure if I'm marrying a woman who could buy a private island before breakfast, I should at least do the heavy lifting." The bedroom was lit only by the soft glow of the city outside. Kellan sat on the edge of the bed, his fingers laced with hers. "I never believed in second chances," he said, "but now I think maybe I just hadn't met the right person." Bianca leaned in, brushing her lips against his. "You didn't get a second chance, Kellan. You built a new story from the ground up." He breathed her in, the silence between them heavy with contentment. In the months that followed, the Hartley project broke ground. Kellan's name went on the cornerstone plaque, not as a courtesy, but as recognition. Zane sketched new designs for the community center, and Bianca framed everyone. Together, they hosted Sunday dinners, built furniture with mismatched screws, and argued over paint swatches for the nursery. Because 6 months after the wedding, Bianca stood in the kitchen with a grin on her face and a small plastic stick in her hand. Kellan froze, then moved toward her slowly. "You're serious?" she nodded, eyes shining. "We're going to need a bigger table." He pulled her into his arms, laughter catching in his throat. "I hope this one likes dinosaur pancakes too." Life didn't get simpler. There were still bills, deadlines, and mornings when someone forgot their lunch on the counter, but there was also warmth. Laughter. A kind of joy that came from knowing you'd been seen, chosen, and loved not in spite of your cracks, but because of them. And every time Bianca looked at the ring on her finger, the one that came from a different world, worn smooth by time she was reminded that sometimes. Love doesn't arrive in a limo or with a headline. Sometimes it limps down a sidewalk with a sprained ankle and finds a man who stops, not because he has to, but because it's who he is. And that kind of love, it lasts. A soft breeze rustled the curtains as Bianca sat cross-legged on the nursery floor, surrounded by tiny onesies in muted earth tones. The crib had been delivered that morning, a custom-built piece Kellan had designed himself, and now she was trying to decide between the mountain print sheets or the ones with stars. Mountain or sky? She asked the baby bump that had become more pronounced in the past few weeks. From the doorway, Kellan leaned his shoulder against the frame, watching her. "Mountains, she's going to be a climber." "You're still convinced it's a girl?" Bianca looked up, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I feel it, strong-willed, stubborn." "Beautiful?" He stepped inside, kneeling beside her. Just like her mother, she raised an eyebrow. "You're not helping me narrow down names. I told you. You pick the first name, I'll pick the middle." "I don't want her to have some over-the-top name like Celestina or Arabella Rain." He laughed quietly. "You think I'd do that to her? You painted the ceiling of this room to look like a forest canopy." "I'm not ruling anything out." Kellan leaned back on his heels, his expression softening. "You're not scared, are you?" Bianca traced her finger along the embroidered edge of the blanket in her lap. "Not of the baby, just how much this matters. It's like I finally got everything I didn't dare ask for. You earned every inch of it." She looked at him. "Did I?" He didn't speak. Instead, he kissed her forehead and rested his hand over hers, both of them pressing lightly against her stomach. The following week brought Kellan's first major site issue. A delivery of reclaimed brick was short by nearly a third, and the supplier blamed the trucking company. With deadlines looming, Kellan could have called in a favor from someone higher up the food chain, but he didn't. He stayed late, called every contact he had, and negotiated a direct deal from a small yard 2 towns over. When he finally got home, covered in dust and dried mortar, Bianca was in the kitchen stirring something in a pot. "I figured you'd be too tired to cook," she said, not looking up. "I'm too tired to chew," he muttered, dropping his tool belt by the door. She turned, holding out a spoon. "Taste this," he blinked. "You cooked. Don't look so surprised. I watched a video. It was labeled easy." Kellan took the spoon and tasted. "Okay, that's actually good. I know," she grinned. "I followed every step like it was a classified mission." He pulled her gently into his arms, resting his chin on the top of her head. "You didn't have to do this, I know." She paused. "I wanted to make something for you." "You've been carrying so much." Kellan exhaled slowly, his hands resting on the small of her back. "It's different now." "What is?" "Having someone who notices when I'm tired, who doesn't make me explain why I'm quiet." Bianca pulled back enough to look at him. "You don't have to carry everything." "Not alone." "I know. Still getting used to that." As the dinner simmered and the sun dipped below the skyline, they sat together, the sound of the city muffled by the warm quiet of home. 2 months later, the Hartley Street model home opened to the public. Kellan stood beside Bianca as cameras flashed and ribbon cutters posed. The mayor gave a speech, and donors sipped champagne. But Kellan's eyes kept drifting to the cluster of families at the edge of the crowd, young couples, tired parents, kids with wide eyes and sticky fingers. "This is the part I care about," he said under his breath. Bianca nodded. "That's why it's yours." He turned to her, brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I transferred full operational oversight to you this morning. The board approved it unanimously." "It's your project now, start to finish." He stared at her. "You're serious. I've never been more. You built the foundation of this thing, and I trust you to keep it standing." Kellan didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached for her hand, his fingers tightening around hers. When the cameras turned their way, someone called out, "Smile for the future power couple." Bianca leaned in close, her voice low. "They have no idea how much power we've already built." The baby came 3 weeks early. Bianca had just finished a video call with a former investor when the first contraction hit. Kellan was at a site check-in, unreachable, and the driver Bianca usually used was stuck in gridlock 6 blocks away. So she called the only person who made sense in the moment, Zane's teacher, Miss Emerson, who lived a few streets over and had once told her she used to be a midwife in her 20s. 30 minutes later, Bianca was in the backseat of Miss Emerson's Prius, gripping the headrest like her life depended on it. By the time Kellan reached the hospital, Bianca was already in a room, red-faced and furious. "You missed the part where I threatened to bite the nurse," she gasped as he rushed to her side. "You're okay?" he asked, breathless. "I'm in labor." "What part of that seems okay?" He kissed her forehead, his hands trembling. "I'm here now," she glared at him. "You'd better be." Hours later, just as dawn broke over the city skyline, their daughter arrived. She weighed just under 6 pounds and had a faint swirl of dark hair and a cry that could slice glass. Bianca held her close, skin to skin, tears streaking her face. Kellan sat beside them, one hand on Bianca's shoulder, the other gently cupping their daughter's head. "She's perfect." Bianca looked down at the tiny face nestled against her chest. "Her name is Rowan." Kellan nodded. "Rowan Grace." Bianca glanced at him. "You said you'd pick the middle name." "I did." He looked at her, eyes full. "Because you've always carried everything with grace, even when you didn't have to." A week later, they brought Rowan home. Zane had made a welcome sign out of glitter and construction paper, taping it over the front door. He took one look at his baby sister and declared her way too small to be interesting, before sitting beside her bassinet with a picture book and reading anyway. At night, when the world was finally still, Kellan would hold Rowan in the crook of one arm and Bianca's hand in the other, and feel like the world had finally stopped spinning without him. The townhouse was louder now, full of cries, lullabies, and the occasional crash when Zane got too ambitious with his toys. But it was also fuller, brighter. Bianca took a step back from her companies, choosing to advise rather than lead. She built a mentorship program for young women in business and launched a grant that funded sustainable housing startups in underrepresented communities. Kellan expanded the Hartley Project, moving into other neighborhoods, bringing on apprentices, and building something that felt like legacy. Every Sunday, they hosted breakfast in the garden. Friends, coworkers, and neighbors gathered around mismatched chairs and steaming platters, laughter rising with the morning breeze. One crisp morning in late autumn, Bianca stood barefoot on the porch, Rowan on her hip, and watched Kellan chase Zane across the yard with a paper kite. Rowan cooed, nuzzling against her neck. Bianca kissed her daughter's forehead. "You've got a good one, sweetheart." Kellan looked up, catching her gaze from across the lawn. He grinned, waving the kite like a banner. Bianca waved back, heart full in a way that had nothing to do with success or money or headlines. It had everything to do with the man who saw her when she was limping and lost and chose her anyway. And now, every day, she got to choose him back.